Hey everyone. Okay, so today we are going to look at one of the next inner resources that Dr. Hanson talks about in the book Resilient, and this is the inner resource of gratitude. And I'm excited to explore this with you today. So, if we think about gratitude, like I mentioned, you can think about it like an inner resource. And Hanson suggests that we can practice gratitude in these 4 ways. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. We can practice it through giving thanks, which is probably the thing we think about the most, taking pleasure, feeling successful, and being happy for others. And we're going to talk about each of those today a little bit. So let's dive in. Giving thanks is the first way that we can practice gratitude, and this is the one that we're probably the most familiar with. When we think about giving thanks, here's a few thoughts to add. Robert Emmons and other researchers have found that saying thank you for things in your life brings a collection of benefits, and some of these are, and they probably won't surprise you, but in the research it shows up that saying thank you for the things in your life can add to feeling more optimism, happiness, and self-worth, and less envy, anxiety, and depression. It can also add to feeling and experiencing more compassion, generosity, forgiveness, stronger relationships, less loneliness. Those are big deals. Better sleep, greater resilience, which is really ultimately what we're talking about here, is the idea of resilience, right? So saying thank you for the things in our lives, according to many researchers, including Robert Emmons, has these kinds of benefits. So just to be clear, it doesn't mean that you're denying injustice or minimizing hassles or loss or illness, right? All of those things can also be going on in your life, or you may be experiencing or noticing those things. It doesn't mean that you're not noticing or aware of those things, but it's also that you find ways to give thanks for and appreciate what is also true. So, flowers, sunlight, fresh water, kindness, easy access to the internet or to knowledge or to wisdom, right? Being able to be in university right now, even if you can't be in person, or where, whatever you're doing right now in terms of your studies, right? These things that we can find appreciation for. So in gratitude research, one of the key findings is that there's striking value in celebrating the gifts of life with others as well. So, if you can bring other people into the celebration with you, even better, right? So when you say thanks and are thankful to other people, offering thanks, inviting others to be thankful as well. So I would just invite you to try to make thankfulness a regular part of your day if you don't already. Perhaps think of 3 good things before you go to sleep at night. Think 3 things you could say thank you for in your life, or maybe when you wake up in the morning. And remember those heal steps that we've talked about throughout the semester, right? That have a positive experience, enrich it, absorb it, link it to something that maybe was negative in the past, right? So if you're really internalizing gratitude, you're spending some time on each of those steps and what you're so grateful for, even if it's something little. Notice not all of these things, fresh water is something we often take for granted, but could you be grateful for that today? Could you be grateful for your internet, right? So the question that I would offer you, and maybe you pause this video right now and think about this, are what are 3 things that you can feel grateful for today? And we'll just pause for a moment. You may pause the recording and think about that. As we continue on, one of the next ways that we can experience gratitude is by taking pleasure. I really love this one. It takes deliberate effort for most of us to slow down and really experience pleasure, let ourselves experience and take pleasure in something. And again, this can happen even in spite of other things perhaps that are frustrating you, right? So you can still take pleasure in something even if there are other things around you that are also causing pain. Like you can experience both at the same time. And if you think back to a couple videos ago, we talked about agency, the ability to choose, right? And so taking pleasure is an expression of agency. It's the ability to be able to choose to do this alongside anything else that you're experiencing. So even in the worst times, you can find pleasure in a sip of water, the call of a bird, the memory of kindness. So I want to invite you to reflect in the past 24 hours. I'm going to talk with you about a few different types of pleasure you might have experienced and see what you notice here. In the past 24 hours, what sensory pleasures have you experienced? What have you been able to see, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell? What has brought you pleasure through your senses? What mental or emotional pleasure have you experienced? Have you learned something new? Have you had time to read a book or receive a hug? Those things could be mental, emotional pleasures. What social pleasures might you have experienced? Have you had a laugh with someone? Have you worked in a team in a way that felt good with somebody? Have you felt like you understood someone better or they understood you better? Social pleasure. What moral pleasures have you experienced? Maybe you've had a feeling of integrity or dedication, grit, right? Authenticity, knowing that you did the right thing in a situation. That can be a sense of moral pleasure, right? So these are all different ways you might take pleasure. And I just want to invite you to each day pause and consider how you've taken in pleasurable experiences. Big or little, again, big or little pleasurable experiences, but how have you taken pleasure in your life? The next way we practice and experience gratitude, this inner resource, is through feeling successful. And when we feel like we've met our goals, we tend to feel good. We tend to have lower stress, build positive momentum. And this is a really important time for us to check in about our feelings of success, right? If we trust that we're making progress, this helps us stay in our green zone. Remember that? Our green zone, our responsive zone. So if we're like, yeah, I'm making progress, we tend to feel more satisfied when we are feeling like we're making progress towards something. So notice that in yourself. And I want to invite you to take in experiences of successful goal attainment, right? And they can be big or little goals, but reaching goals and noticing where you've had success builds up an internal sense of being successful, right? Then we continue to build that up in ourselves. We see ourselves as successful. So allow yourself to notice an accomplishment, How often do you feel success? Remember earlier on in the semester, we talked about the fact that failure is often highlighted in our brain, right? We talked about our brains being Velcro for negative experiences. So oftentimes when we fail or when we don't do as well as we wanted to, we really tend to focus on that. And we often sort of just check things off a list if we finish something like, okay, got that done. Oh, finished that test. Oh, I did okay on it. Okay, great. Move on to the next thing. Oh, I submitted that assignment. Oh, I got a good grade on it. Okay, cool. Whatever it is, we often move through those successes so quickly. And again, if you think back to before, we talked about the brain being like Teflon for positive experiences, right? So something good happens and we're like, cool, on to the next thing. And those negative things we spend a lot of time on typically. So this is an invitation to be mindful of succeeding at small outcomes. Reading your textbook, right? Did you get through what you want to do in your textbook? Going on a run, going on a hike, finishing your biology homework, right? Whatever it is that you're like, okay, I did that thing that I wanted to do today, and recognizing that. And notice then the progress towards big outcomes, right? If you've completed a test or a class towards your degree program, or maybe you've saved money for a trip, things that you are making progress towards. Feeling successful is acknowledging that you've made a difference. You made progress towards something. So again, I would invite you, maybe you pause this right now and make a list of big or small ways you've been successful in the past week. Feeling successful. And the final way that we practice gratitude is also being happy for others. Being happy for others. This is also called altruistic joy. And again, we're not ignoring the negative. We can feel compassion for suffering, and we often do feel a lot of compassion for suffering, right? We can feel compassion for suffering, but we can also then practice feeling happiness for good fortune in others, right? That's the other side of that. That's the altruistic joy. The Dalai Lama has famously said something like this as a paraphrase: if you can be happy when others are happy, you can always be happy, since there's someone somewhere who is happy. So even if you're not feeling happy, can you be happy for someone else? Well, then you can be happy. So then you can therefore delight in others' good fortune. And this may feel like a stretch for you, but I want to just make note here because I think this is really interesting. Researchers suggest, and Dr. Hanson suggests, that this is the antidote to disappointment and envy. So happiness for others can pull you out of a self-critical or bitter preoccupation, shift your mood in a positive direction. So I think we've all likely gotten caught in spaces of envy or disappointment at different times in our lives. And what we're seeing in the research is that when we are able to practice altruistic joy and shift the way we think about something, it actually is good for us as well. So, start with people it's easier to be happy for, and then slow down and take that in. And then try with random people, right? See if you can start to develop the habit of feeling happy for others. Letting yourself feel happy for others. So again, maybe you pause here and see if you can list 3 people who you could feel happy for and or with right now, today. Or 3 people you could be happy for. People you know, people you don't know. So this is the summary of being in gratitude. We've talked today about how gratitude is an inner resource. And we often look off into the distance and think, when this happens, or when I achieve this, or when this external circumstance finally happens, then I'll get to feel good. And gratitude as an inner resource and a way to help us be resilient in our lives is to say you get to feel good now. You get to, yes, hopefully you feel good in the future, but also you get to feel good now. And how do you do that? The ways that Hanson would suggest are to practice this, and I'm going to suggest practice this week, giving thanks, taking pleasure, as we talked about, finding pleasure, noticing your big and small successes, and even celebrating yourself if you can. How can you celebrate yourself, right, in the ways that that feel good to you? And finally, finding ways to be happy for others as well. So this is your next practice as you are practicing being resilient. Gratitude will help you on your path as well. So thanks for taking this time with me, and I will see you in the class.